Good afternoon, everybody. It's our Friday afternoon webinar. I'm Dr. Mike Talbot. I'm very pleased you can join us here this afternoon for one in a series of afternoon webinars. I'm Dr. Mike Talbot. I'm the founder and CEO of UK Mediation. And for those of you who don't know me, background in psychotherapy, and we approach the topic of conflict resolution, mediation, confident conversations, assertive communication in the workplace and beyond, all from the angle of our own model, which is built on the psychology of conflict. So just a very quick sort of introduction to me there. So I'm not from an HR background, I'm not a lawyer. We come at this topic from the angle of understanding the people in order to understand how we get into conflict, what's so difficult about it, how do we move on from it, or indeed how can we avoid it in the first place. So that's me. And then you, very pleased, we've got people from the UK and from around the world joining us this afternoon. For this webinar will be about 40 minutes of me talking, a couple of video clips, a few little tools to take away, a few examples of using the techniques I'm going to cover for having more confident conversations, avoiding conflict in the first place, heading off the need for mediators, doing ourselves out of business. There's a chat box on screen if you're watching us live here this afternoon on 29th of April 2022. You will be able to ask a question, make a comment, just use the chat box there. I'll try and get back to as many as I can as we go along. I'll leave a bit of time at the end for Q&A as well. And my colleague is watching the chat box as well, so if there's any resources we can point you towards or any way we can help you, either I or my colleague will be on to your comments or questions as we move through our webinar. Okay, so let's have a think about what we've got to talk about this afternoon. So first of all, a bit of an overview. What makes a difficult conversation? Why is it that some conversations are so difficult to have? Let's break that down a little bit and talk about why some of these sort of interactions that we have to have with colleagues, and I'll keep it mostly around workplace issues. Why is it so difficult to do? So we'll drill down into that a little bit and look at some of the components there, and then be thinking about the types of difficult conversations we have to have. So we'll look at the range of things that feel a bit more challenging, feel a little bit more difficult to get the conversation going, to get a good outcome from that conversation. What are those types of conversations? And then I'll go on to talk about an example there. We've got an example of a workplace dispute with a couple of people, Andy and Letitia. So I'll show you a few clips from that, and then a few tips and techniques for what you can do to make these conversations rather easier. A lot of people do courses on difficult conversations, challenging conversations. We've called ours confident conversations because we think at the heart of these difficulties, it's about how you feel when you approach somebody with the intention of having a challenging conversation, a contentious dialogue, a conflict-ridden chat with that person. So it mostly comes down to feeling confident about it, having the sense of this is going to be okay. So the tips and techniques are around how to sort of ground yourself so that you do feel more confident when you approach these situations. There's no end of resources about the skills that you would need, or things you can do, ways you can, scripts that you could follow. But for us, it's about the confidence that's at the heart of it. So that's the breakdown really of the webinar. Will take us up to round about 1:45 today, and a bit of time at the end, like I say, for some Q&A. But do feel free to comment as we go along. I'll keep an eye on your comments and try and address them, and if I can't get round to them, then my colleague will. Okay, so first of all, what makes it difficult? What's so hard about having some conversations with people? Why do we put them off? Why don't we get on with it and have those conversations? Well, the first thing I think really is about needing the time. And often when you speak to people within organisations, they'll say, well, we just can't find the time to have that chat. Sometimes these conversations are held in the corridor or over the kettle. Sometimes we need to make time available. So not just time to hold the conversation, but sometimes actually, again, thinking about the confidence that it takes and the sense of being self-assured and being certain about what you're doing, is you need a bit of time to prepare. You need to stop and think, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? What do I expect to get back from that person? Also then time to hold the conversation. We can't do these things in a rushed way. We need to be sure that we do have a sufficiently large window of time to be able to hold the conversation properly, deal with whatever comes back, and make sure that we are approaching the objective that we set for ourselves, and also some time to follow up. So it's always a good idea when we've had a more challenging conversation with somebody that we do follow it up afterwards and say, how was that for you? Are you okay since our chat the other day? Anything else we need to pick up, or do you feel the need to talk again? So preparing for a conversation, actually holding the conversation in a non-rushed way, and ideally being able to follow up afterwards. So that's the first thing that can make conversations difficult, is that we don't have the time to do that. Second thing is about the skills. It's about the tools. It's about the words that you choose. It's about how you hold and conduct yourself in the process of that conversation. In particular, it's about the self-awareness that you have about how you might come over to another person. I think that's a crucially important thing. We gain self-awareness through feedback. So being able to hear from trusted colleagues how you come over, sometimes being able to practice the conversation and develop those skills so that you are self-aware, you realise how you may come across to other people, but also that you have some strategies for how to communicate. You've got some idea about a route map or a toolkit that you can use in the way of communication strategies to be able to come across. And I think the other skill that's key in any form of communication, and be it within processes like mediation or facilitated conversations, or just conducting yourself more assertively within a conversation, is being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I think it's a key skill. So if we had to pull out three things here: the self-awareness, the communication strategy, but that ability to be able to see the situation from the other person's point of view, and being able to let them know that you can see the situation from their point of view as well. And I'll come on to say a bit more about that later on as well. So self-awareness, some strategies or toolkit, and the empathy that allows you to be able to see a situation from somebody else's perspective. So there's time, there's skills. And the other thing I think makes it difficult is this thing about confidence. It's our fears of what will happen if we do raise a contentious topic with a colleague or a report or a manager or a customer, sometimes client, of what will come back. We do fear, and it's normal and it's okay, that it's going to get personal. So one of the things that we do in our self-talk when we're preparing for a difficult situation like this is we worry that it's going to get personal. It'll start to become less about the issue and more about you and me. That sometimes people, when we raise contentious topics with them, they can tend to push back and do the whataboutism, as we call it. Say, yeah, but what about this and what about that? So the whataboutism can be something that we fear. It's going to get personal, and if I raise a contentious topic with you, you're going to come back with me at me with something even more contentious or possibly personal. So it's a fear we have, small or large. It can be within our self-talk. It can be a quiet voice, it can be a loud voice, but we do, if you like, project this notion that this is going to get personal. Second thing we worry about is that it's going to make things worse. And when we pick up mediation cases here at UK Mediation, quite often what's gone wrong is that things haven't been addressed early enough. So it's only got into a dispute or something that might be on the threshold of a grievance or a performance or disciplinary process. It's only got there because people have avoided the conversation, worrying that if they do have that conversation, it's going to make things worse. So they get into this very avoidant place, avoiding conflict for fear that it'll make things worse. And generally speaking, unaddressed conflict doesn't go away, and it tends to grow, it tends to snowball. So if we don't address things early on, for fear it's going to make things worse, ironically, that's probably going to make things worse. Okay. So, and the third thing is about how the other person will be, actually how I will be as well, our personal responses to conflict. So we fear, if we lack confidence about having these kinds of conversations, that I will get upset or the other person will get upset, and then that will be awful. So speaking personally, as a psychotherapist, I got used to, in 12 years of private practice, of having people crying on me quite a lot, and I don't fear tears. We cry because we get frustrated, we cry when we're sad, we cry when we're impatient sometimes, sometimes we cry when we're angry. Okay, people cry for all sorts of reasons, people get upset for all sorts of reasons, It's up to the practitioner, it's up to you, if you're going to have a conversation, to be ready to contain that. We talk about containment. Be ready to be able to take that on board. Having the sense in yourself, the confidence in yourself, that you'll be able to deal with it if the other person gets upset or if you yourself get upset. And when we have long relationships with colleagues, we get to know people pretty well, these things start to matter, and actually you yourself may become upset in the process of having a difficult conversation with somebody you know very well, trust, maybe like. So it's about the confidence to be able to deal with that, contain it, broad enough shoulders that you'll be able to soak it up and it won't derail the conversation. So 3 things that make conversations difficult. One is we sometimes don't have the time or don't make the time. We do need a skill set, something to be able to draw on to make that conversation happen, and we need the confidence that it's going to be okay, even if it gets personal, and the confidence it's probably not going to make things worse if we approach it in the right way. So let's think about what we mean by the right way. One wrong way that we approach conversations quite often is starting with an agenda of thinking, okay, here's what's going to happen at the end of this conversation. I need to get this person to do X. I want this situation to change in this particular way. I've got something that I really need to make happen, and it's just about persuading the other party into my point of view so that this thing happens. Okay. Now, sometimes that is appropriate. Often it isn't. Often it's not appropriate at all. And we talk as mediators, we talk as people who facilitate conversations or who want to communicate more confidently and more assertively. We talk about this notion of positions and interests, and that there picture is of an iceberg. So we've got the bit of ice poking up above the ocean and a very much larger piece of ice below the surface of the ocean. And anybody who's trained with us, and I know there's a few people on today who have trained with us, you're very welcome to join us today. Nice to see you. You'd have heard of this. Those of you who haven't, there's loads of literature about this if you want to look it up and go into it a bit more deeply. But what I will say is that we have often in mind a position. So I've got a position, you've got a position, and this is what we say has to happen. Often when people get into litigious situations, going to court or going to a employment tribunal or going into arbitration, both sides set themselves up with a position. This has got to be the outcome. No, this has got to be the outcome. And this is what we do. And often if we get stuck there, the best we're going to do is a compromise. So for example, a situation to do with building an extension, just something must be on my mind, and the builder falls out with clients. And clients and builder have an argument, tools get thrown down, the bill won't get paid, the extension doesn't get finished. Builder says, this is how much you owe me. Client says, this is how much work you've got to do or put right before I'll pay you. They get into this positional standoff, and it's a classic case which would go to court, probably small claims court, and where both sides go in, probably with representation, with a fixed position in mind. I need my bill paid this much, I need my work finished, has to be to this standard and by this time scale as well. Position. And often when it does go into litigation or when it does go into some more sort of legal adversarial process, we split the difference, we compromise. Apart from that approach, there's an alternative approach, which is when we look beneath the surface of the ocean, if you like, at the larger part of the iceberg, and we think about, in terms of that position, why do people need a particular outcome? What is it about their needs that's being compromised? The need to be treated with dignity, the need for a sense of fairness in the workplace, the need to feel that work has been shared out fairly, that I'm adequately rewarded for what I do, that my skills have been recognised, that I'm being challenged, that I'm being pushed to develop and use my abilities to the full, etc, etc, etc. So although we take up positions and say this is what's got to happen, usually, well always, beneath the surface there's a set of interests. There is some need in me that's being compromised. And probably if I'm in conflict with you, there's probably a need in you that you feel is being compromised as well. As a manager, the need to be allowed to manage, the need to be supported to manage, the need to have a sense that your employees are on the same side as you, that your reports are on the same side as you. A sense of, whatever it is, the interest is the need, and we get into conflict because I feel that something that's important to me is being compromised and something you feel is important to you is being compromised. This is why we get into conflict. And underneath it all, there's a set of motivations or very basic needs which are being trampled upon, and these tend to be the roots of more persistent conflict. So have a look at that. There's lots of stuff you could follow up on that. There are other webinars, there's some stuff on our website about positions and interests. But basically, we get stuck into conflict because we have a positional standoff, and what we as facilitators and mediators need to do is think about the interests. What need in you and what need in me is being challenged here. And the way we approach conflict depends a lot on our history, on our own psychological makeup, on the context in which we find ourselves. But again, very briefly, it leads us into adopting a set of conflict styles, different conflict styles that we have. And this is a piece of work that's two authors, Thomas and Killman, from 1972. If you Google Thomas and Killman, you'll find this in various different forms. There's whole courses on it. So respect to those two guys for coming up with this way of thinking about how we approach conflict when we think of conflict as two sets of needs being in competition. So I've got my needs, got your needs, and how we deal with our conflict can be attributed to one or another conflict style. So let's just have a quick look at what those styles are. One thing I might do is give way. I'll let you have your way. So if I have conflict with you, I'll think, all right then, along the bottom here, there's the axis which talks about my needs. And I'll say, don't worry about my needs. I'll put those in the background. What's more important is you getting your needs met. So I will accommodate and I'll let you have your way. The second thing that might happen is that I'll just avoid the conflict. And as I was saying earlier, quite often when situations come into our office as a mediation case, it's because parties have avoided having a difficult conversation around this competition of needs. They've just moved on from it, looked the other way, got distracted, concentrated on something else instead of addressing the interpersonal conflict, the elephant in the room. And people just avoiding this very contentious topic. It means the conflict doesn't go away, but it is a way of just getting around conflict, pretending it's not there. So the avoidance. Another thing that might happen is the compromise. So previous slide, I was talking about positions, and quite often in legalistic disputes, very adversarial, often financial disputes, there's a split the difference thing. So people compromise, meet each other halfway. Another thing that might happen is that we have a collaborative response, which is where we aim for as mediators and as people who are holding more confident conversations or facilitating other people's conversations. We're looking for not what A said had to happen, not what B said had to happen, but when we scratch the surface and find out what both sides' interests are and have them have a dialogue, we should come up with a collaborative outcome, something in which both parties get their needs met. A third way, something that neither of them had thought of initially, but when they collaborate and put their heads together, put their needs on the table, they can figure out some way that they can both simultaneously get their needs met. And when we don't do that, often what we'll get into is a competitive situation where I say, well, look, blow this, we are going to have the conflict, but we're going to do things my way. And again, this is one of the ingredients in a recipe for prolonged conflict, when somebody just insists or pulls rank or uses their hierarchical position in an organisation to say, here's what's going to happen, mate. That's what we call the competitive response to conflict. So that's a very, very brief overview of Thomas and Killman's model around conflict styles. When we identify in any conflict situation, and a difficult conversation is today what I'm talking about as a conflict situation, when we identify people's interests and then we talk about how do we approach getting those interests met. It might be that we just avoid the conflict, there's no way we're going to do this. It might be that I accommodate and I say, okay, have your way. Or I might be insistent that we're going to do what I say, in which case it's all about my way in the competitive place. We might just split the difference, which is a sort of temporary way to solve conflict quite often, particularly when it involves personal issues. So we might meet halfway, or we might put our heads together and think about collaborating and finding a third way. Okay, there's a little bit of, I don't know, theory, a few principles, a few basics, building blocks about how we think at UK Mediation around this idea about having more confident conversations. So the idea of positions and interests, thinking about why conversations are difficult, and then thinking about conflict styles, and finishing that section of the webinar thinking that, okay, let's aim for collaboration. Let's aim for this collaborative response, some way of bringing about a better conversation, a more confident conversation, in which we feel we've made the time, we've got the skills, we have the confidence, and we can approach things in a more collaborative way. Right, types of conversations. Two types of conversations in which we may need more confidence. The first one is the ambush conversation. This is where you didn't expect that somebody was going to go hammering on your door and bowling in to complain about someone or something or you. That's the ambush conversation. And the second thing is the more planned conversation, which is where you as an individual decide you want to speak to someone about something, and you've got to get your thoughts sorted out and find your own confidence and think about your own skills and make time for that conversation and do it in a more planned way. So two sorts of conversations we're going to look at: the ambush conversation and the planned conversation. So first of all, let's think about the ambush conversation. This is where you're suddenly faced and unexpectedly faced with a difficult conversation. Somebody, stops you in the corridor or buttonholes you in the car park or comes piling into your office and insists that we talk about this thing right now. What we tend to do is to problem solve. We say, okay, well, what we could do is this, or how about we try that, or shall we do this, or what we did before was the other. Let's give that a go. So we tend to try and problem solve very quickly when we are ambushed and somebody puts us on the spot in that way. That's the first thing I would say about that. Second thing I would say is that when we do this, it will feel to the other person that you're telling them what to do. And that's possibly not what they wanted. Somebody comes in to complain about something or to give out about a colleague or give out about a situation or about you. They probably don't want you just telling them what to do. Because that's how they will perceive it if you go straight into problem solving. That can lead into them becoming rather more resistant, and that could just make the conflict worse. So colleague or report or manager comes piling into your office wanting to remonstrate about a particular thing or complain or give out or just bring something to your attention. You try problem solving straight away. They hear you as telling them what to do. It just makes things worse. So let's try and avoid that. Enough words there. So let's give you a different medium for a second. I'm going to talk about an ambush conversation here, and we're going to show you a little clip in a second of a bit of a disagreement between two colleagues. These are Andy and Letitia. So the guy is doing a college course. He's writing a report which needs some input from Letitia. They work in a local authority together. Letitia's done some work for this report. It's not really her central to her role, or it's not something she does very easily. She's put a lot of extra work in it. She even stayed up late to complete the part of the report that she thought Andy wanted. And what we're about to witness here, unexpectedly, unplanned, they just happen to coincide over the kettle at morning coffee break. The subject of the report gets raised. Conversation suddenly happens. He's not ready for it. She's certainly not ready for what comes back at her. And it doesn't go well. So let's see what happens with Andy and Letitia.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, Letitia.
Would you like a cup of tea?
No, I'll use my own if that's all right. I prefer this.
You sure?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay then. Right, so how's it going at work now?
Very busy, and the college course is going very well, but that's what I expected it would be.
Right, so have you made some sort of friends on the course? Or?
Yes, I've got a good group.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm looking forward to lunch today, though. The team's meeting and we're all having lunch together.
Actually, I'm going to give that a miss. I'm going to meet up with the guys from college, the ones I'm doing the report
Oh,
with.
Andy, that's a shame. We actually planned to meet today and meet for lunch, and so that was pre-arranged, wasn't it?
Well, I didn't think anybody would mind, and I think probably this is a bit more important to meet up with them.
Oh,
That report is
might.
very important.
I actually worked extra hours to complete the report, so we could actually meet for lunch today. So
Yeah,
it's quite important, and even Jackie's coming, and she, you know how busy she is. I mean,
Actually, last week when you were not there, I read the report. It was on your desk, and I thought, well, I'll take the opportunity, which I did.
right, okay.
And I've decided we're not going to use it.
You're not going to use the report?
No. It really wasn't what I wanted, and I'm not sure it'll fit with what we're doing. So I decided not to use it.
It and
No.
you didn't think it would fit?
No.
I don't understand. What are you saying?
Don't take offence, but I've decided that we're not going to
Don't
use
ask me
it.
not to take offence. Please don't ask me not to take offence, because I am going to take offence, because I think basically you don't think the report is good enough.
I mean, not get angry about it.
Well,
it's not that important,
I
honestly.
find it very difficult to remain calm if you're insulting my work.
Well, no, I'm not insulting you.
Well, you are by saying that you don't want that piece of work in your report. You have all these high-flying ideas because you're a graduate. It's so theoretical, you think you're superior to everybody else in the team. And you just, you insist on making your own tea. You don't want to come out to lunch with us. You don't want to do anything with us. It's all your fault. You're just like that because you're such a prat. That's basically it. And you may not think lunch is important, and you may not think the report is important, but I do. And I'll tell you something. Jackie will, and I'm going to see her right now.
Okay, so that didn't go particularly well. And if you were here right now, I'd say what went wrong. So I think we can fairly easily say what went wrong. Clearly there's a bit more to this than meets the eye. There might be something in the context, as there usually is in most conflicts. The context contributes to the breakdown in the interpersonal communication. So Guy is at university doing a college course, and he asks Tisha to write something for this report he's doing, and then he's very dismissive about her work, and she's very offended by that, considering she's put in the extra time and he never took the trouble to come and have a chat with her about it and to say let's discuss how this work can be made so that I can incorporate it into my report, and so on and so forth. We could talk about a lot of things that have gone wrong in the context or in the history of their conflict, but here at the sharp end of this ambush conversation, neither of them expected this to happen. Letitia does not like what she hears. She feels very dismissed and brushed aside, so she very quickly gets angry with him and ends up calling him a word and storming off, and he doesn't know how to handle it at all. He's very unprepared. I would suggest in the drama here that there's perhaps a lack of skill. Certainly very conspicuously there's a lack of skill with the guy, with Andy. He's just got his head down, he's shaking his head, he just wants this to go away. He's trying to avoid the conflict, whereas you could say her style is very competitive, like this is not okay. I need you to recognise that I've done all this and you're going to use it, mate. You're going to put this in your report. So perhaps she's taking on a competitive style, whereas he's just trying to be avoiding the conflict. Okay, so we could talk at length about that, but quite clearly one of the things that's going wrong is they've not had a decent conversation before this. There's just a complete barrier between them. There's not much listening going on between them at all. So they're not hearing each other. They're completely missing each other, not hearing each other's needs. And although in the still there on the slide we can see there's some eye contact between them, a lot of the time in that conversation they just seem to be talking a different language and not even looking at each other. So one of the things we do as practitioners of more confident conversations is to make sure, number one, that we're hearing each other. So you, as somebody who's going to have a more confident conversation, particularly if somebody ambushes you, what you need to do is make sure you've heard what they've said. Those of you who are familiar with Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Covey lays out, as the name suggests, 7 things you can do, particularly as managers. That was his work, about how you can become more effective. And one of the things he says is seek first to understand and then to be understood. So even if somebody ambushes you, try and understand very thoroughly through active listening what they're on about. If you miss the point, it's going to make the situation worse. If you just go straight to problem solving, it's going to make the situation worse. If you get competitive with them and start to insist that things are going to happen your way, it's going to make the situation worse. If the two of you just take up positions, the best you're going to do is a compromise, and it's going to make the relationship worse. It might solve the problem immediately, but how the two of you relate is not going to be assisted by just reaching some kind of a positional compromise. The way to cut through all that, sorry, I'm making it sound like anything you do will make the situation worse. The way to cut through all that, we believe, is first of all to listen actively. We listen actively, so make sure you're hearing what the other person has got to say. There's a fair chance you're missing their point. If you're very shocked and you feel you're blasted against the wall, your hair is blown back by the force of this person's approach, as it looked like with the Andy and Letitia thing, stop that then and just listen. Try and lean into the conversation a little bit. Try and encourage them to talk through non-verbal cues. Good eye contact. Don't have distractions. Stop what you're doing. Put down the pen. Move away from your keyboard. Have a look at them. See what they're on about, and try and interpret through what they say and what they don't say and how they're behaving. What's their point? Okay. As you start to hear their point, reflect what they've said. Let them know that you are endeavouring to take their point on board. You're trying to step into their frame of reference. You're trying to understand their experience of what's going on. It doesn't mean they're wrong or it doesn't mean they're right. But the important thing is find out what is their experience. How come they've gone and knocked your door off the hinges and they're now talking at you at 120 decibels? There's something going wrong here, and your endeavour is to try and understand that and let them know you're trying to understand that through reflecting what they say to you. Just a word or two of what they've said to you, give it back to them so that they get that you're trying to get them. Okay? Slow down the pace a little bit. Use the tone and speed of your voice to focus in, get the general temperature and volume down a little bit so that both of you can gather your thoughts and concentrate on what's important for both of you, and most importantly so that you can start to think about interests. What do I need here? What does this person need here? How can we put our heads together rather than banging our heads together, and find out a third way that perhaps the two of us can get our needs met out of this conversation. And to slow things down is a really important, it sounds like a very basic and simple thing, but it makes a big difference just to slow things down and quieten things down a little bit. Let them know you've got their point by not just reflecting and sometimes paraphrasing perhaps, but summarising what you think you've heard. Check what you think you've heard. Okay, did I hear you correctly that no. So what I think you said is no. Can I just check my understanding of what you've said to me? So make sure I've got it right, and then summarise what they've said. Maybe you get it wrong, summarise again. But your endeavour to try and step into their shoes and try and get an understanding of their experience in this moment is the most important thing. And by doing that, you're expressing empathy. So we can then go on to, okay, I've heard, I've actively listened. Now I can express some empathy. You know, you sound really angry about what's happened. In that kitchen scene, Letitia, you sound really frustrated about your piece of work not being used. You know, you're impatient because you've spent all this time doing the work overnight, and now, you know, you're kind of confused as to why it's not going to be included in my report, and you're clearly annoyed with me for not having spoken to you about it sooner. So that empathic response, it needs to be sincere. Don't just say the words. You need to mean it, of actually noticing how the other person is affected by the situation and by your actions as well. Okay, so a few things there about listening and about empathising. And the other thing we do, I'm going quite quickly through this stuff, but the other thing that we do when we're trying to have a more confident conversation is try and acknowledge that other person's predicament. Say, okay, I can see what's going on for you. I can acknowledge and tell me more about it, because my endeavour right now is to see how things are for you, because clearly something's wrong that we've ended up in this situation. So acknowledging and asking what's going on for that person, and only then might we think about doing some problem solving. So what I'm doing is breaking down a little acronym that we use that, again, those of you who've trained with us would be familiar with, and it's something that's out there. You'll find some literature, some variations on this. There's quite a few variations on it. The one that we use is this little acronym here called LEAP. So we're talking about listening to the person. Make sure that you thoroughly understand and have heard, and giving them the time with the active listening, reflecting and paraphrasing, so that you have let them know, I've heard you, I've got you, I have taken on board what you've said. Also let them know that you can see how they're affected, not just to do with the facts and about the dates, times, places and the details and which bit of the report it was and when you were supposed to do it and etc., but actually noticing the emotional effect that all of this is having on that person. I can see you're frustrated, I can see you're angry, I can tell you're fed up, I can see you're annoyed with me. So empathising, then acknowledging their predicament. You know, you thought, Letitia, this was going to be, or you hoped it was going to be included in my report, and actually, you know, I've not had a proper discussion with you about what was needed for the report. So in the absence of that discussion, you know, you're feeling fed up because I've just batted it back and said, no, we're not going to use it. So acknowledge how that person is affected, and if necessary, ask more about their experience. So, you know, you could ask Letitia several questions in order to illuminate further her experience about what's gone on. So we've listened to her, we've empathised with her, I've asked more questions and acknowledged how she's left feeling, and then we're in a position where we can put our heads together and problem solve. Okay, so We listen, empathise, ask and acknowledge, and we paraphrase and problem solve, put that together, we're taking a leap. What we tend to do when we don't give it the time, or we don't have the skills, or we don't have the confidence, coming back to my first slide, is that we tend to do problem solving first. So we tend to plea. So we problem solve first, then we might do some listening and empathising and asking and acknowledging, but quite often we'll just get too seduced into trying to fix this, often because we're busy and short of time, or don't feel confident enough, or don't have the tools. So it's actually easier to problem solve. Solve this one because there's another 3 problems waiting to be solved. So let's fix this one and then I can move on. But actually the roots of prolonged conflict, the roots of entrenched conflict, they grow in this environment where we're just problem solving and not doing any of the other stuff. Okay. There's the ambush conversation, the Andy and Letitia ambush. Let's think about the second thing, which is a more planned conversation. So this is where you need to speak to somebody about something. You might decide a conversation needs to be had with a colleague or a reporter or a manager. If it's a workplace setting, could also be with a neighbour, could be with a family member, could be a business colleague, could be anything really. But the conversation might need to be had if there's something about a person's behaviours, their language, their communication style, their attitude, something to do with a personal behaviour. You might decide that a conversation needs to be had. That would be one indication for having a planned, challenging conversation with a person. Second thing it might be in the workplace, it might be to do with performance issues. So performance issues could be around attendance, timekeeping, attention to deadlines, all those kind of things. It might be around timekeeping or something more personal. It could be something quite sensitive, but you plan, you intend to have a conversation. Could be some news that you've got to give them that might be difficult for them to hear. We've had an uptick in the referrals, lockdown and post-lockdown, with some people being furloughed and some not. People's jobs being changed, the balance between working from home and working in the office, differing views about vaccines and masks. Lots of things that have arisen out of the pandemic, and there have been quite a lot of situations where there's news that's difficult to hear, news that's difficult to give. So there's plenty of this about, is all I'm trying to say. Okay, let's give you a little example of a more planned conversation. A more planned conversation in the same situation, the Andy Letitia situation, and what happened was Letitia went bowling off to the manager to rah, rah, rah. And the manager we can see here is Jackie in the pale jacket, and Jackie is asked to speak to Andy. She wants to speak to Andy, not to tell him off for what's gone on, but just to try and figure out how can we sort this situation. So it's a difficult conversation, there's rather sensitivities going on, but she's called on Andy to have a chat with him to see if together they can come up with some collaborative solution to what's going on here. So let's see what happens with Jackie and Andy.
Hello Andy, it's Jackie. Glad I caught you. Have you got 5 minutes? Yeah. Can you come over to my office? Okay, thanks. See you then. Bye. Come in. Oh, hi Andy. Thanks for coming over. Have a seat.
Okay.
I wanted to catch up with you because Letitia's been in this morning to see me, and there's a few issues in relation to your working relationship.
Yeah, what's she been saying now then? I saw she got in first.
Well, I've had a private discussion with Letitia this morning, and I'd really like to hear things from your perspective now, and that's private as well. So tell me a bit about what's happened.
I was just talking to her about the report in the kitchen, and you know how important that is for all of us. I tried to explain to her that the bit that she'd done we weren't going to use.
You weren't going to use?
No. We're trying to bring things up to current thinking, and we're trying to produce a report that reflects good on our service and on ourselves. I didn't think it was what we were looking for, and I just nicely told her that. But she flew off the handle. Completely unnecessary.
What happened when she flew off the handle?
Well, I was in the kitchen, and I was just trying to make some tea, and she talked about lunch to start with, and I did explain to her that it was really important that I can meet the guys from college who are doing the report as well. And then when I tried to explain to her that I wasn't going to use the report, she just flew off the handle. She was extremely rude and aggressive. She called me a prat, and I'm not having it.
I need you both to be able to work together on this. It's a critical report, isn't it, as you said earlier. And obviously you're both involved in it as well. I'd really like to get the two of you together to talk about it. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not going to get together until she apologises.
Okay, well, I'll talk to Letitia then about the language that she's used to you, and then I'll come back to you and take it further from there. If I talk to Letitia about her language and she apologises to you for that, are you then happy to talk about the whole matter together?
Well, I'll see.
Okay. Leave that with me then, and I'll get back to you quickly in a moment or two when I've seen Letitia. All right?
All right then.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we see Jackie there doing a rather good job of the intended planned conversation. She gets Andy in, good deal of listening. She empathises with his predicament, asks and acknowledges what's going on for him, and then goes quickly into problem solving. The whole thing's contained in what she does into 2.5 minutes, something like that. But she handles it very well. It could have gone quite differently because Letitia got there first and she got Jackie and chewed Jackie's ear off about how fed up she was about this colleague, and it would have been very easy to get seduced into Letitia's way of thinking and ended up this being quite adversarial. Would have sounded more like a telling off, which would not have gone well. So a good example of using the skills for the planned conversation there. So what did she do? Well, when is as soon as possible. So she got onto that straight away. As soon as, we don't see all the rest of the video, but as soon as Letitia had left Jackie's office, she's more or less on the phone to Andy. Andy, I need a word with you. So do it as soon as possible. Do not leave conflict to fester. Where did she do it? It was in a private setting. That wasn't entirely neutral. It was the boss's office, but often it's helpful to use a neutral venue, or sometimes walk and talk is good. If you've got something difficult to say to somebody, the reason for walk and talk is, number one, I think it keeps the breathing rate up, the pulse up, but you don't have to be looking directly at each other the whole time. If it's something that's difficult to raise and the person may feel a bit embarrassed or shamed by what you're saying, to actually have a bit of a stroll around and the two of you can be looking at the birds in the trees on this lovely spring day, and it doesn't have to be a sort of too intense face-to-face where people might feel a little bit got at or shamed by what you're saying, particularly if it's something more personal. Why do we do it? Because we need to address the issue before it becomes worse. We need to get in there and make sure we nip things in the bud. Okay, so planning a conversation, there's a lot more I could say about it. Only a few snippets here, but do it quickly, use some of the skills we've talked about, remember leap, and don't leave it. Okay, when you've had a difficult conversation with somebody, always a good idea to reflect on it. Can be helpful to think about what you've achieved if you've managed to summon up the confidence, the mettle, to have a conversation and try, and keeping in mind all these ideas about positions and interests, a collaborative response and leap and so on and so forth. Always pat yourself on the back when you've had a decent, difficult conversation with somebody and feel as if you brought your confidence and your skills to the fore, made some time for it. You've probably achieved something quite good. Debrief with a trusted colleague. It's always a good idea to speak to somebody within or outside of work and say, wow, well, you know that thing I told you that I was going to have to raise with Andy, or that difficult conversation I was going to have, I did it, and here's how it went. So always debriefing is a good way that you can find out what went right, what didn't go so right, and learn from it. And also to, to sort of share your experience, talk with other people about what goes well in these conversations, what doesn't go so well in these conversations, and then look forward to the next one, really. Okay. That's a really, really quick dash through some of the building blocks for more confident conversations, both with the ambush conversation and the more planned conversation. We do the whole thing in various training courses. I won't do a salesman thing here. Check it out on the website. For now, just a couple of questions to deal with. Sammy says, who is the best person to raise any sensitive issues with a team member? Well, there needs to be an element of trust and rapport between the two parties when you're doing this. So if as a manager, right from day one with colleagues, think about one day you and I might need to have a difficult, challenging conversation, and just think about using our own interpersonal skills, your own personality, about building rapport with that person, so that when the day comes, and assuming it's your responsibility to be raising things with your reports, you feel in a position where you can raise difficult things with them. What we see go wrong is where a manager is quite remote, not physically remote, but sort of emotionally and interpersonally remote from their reports. And then the day comes when they have to say something difficult to them, and the report can be taken aback. So even though that manager then, he or she might use all the skills in the world and have all the confidence in the world and make enough time for it, but actually we've never had a conversation like this before, and it jars a little bit. So get to know your reports, get to know your colleagues, get to know your manager if possible, so that when the time comes. But the short answer to your question, Sammy, about who should raise sensitive issues, it should be, number one, whoever's responsible for doing it. But number two, how you initiate that conversation is really important. So not cornering somebody, not ambushing somebody, not doing it by email, but the words that you use, the script that you use to be able to open a difficult dialogue with somebody, that's really, really important. There's a lot more I could say about that, but we don't have much time. And just do one more, which is from, they're coming in actually, but one more from George. My employer is concerned about one of our team's timekeeping. A disciplinary has already been had around someone's timekeeping. Okay, thanks for this, George. But is it too late for a conversation? No, it is not. So I'd need a little bit more detail to give you a detailed answer, but if a disciplinary has been had and the timekeeping is still bad, I would assume that person's maybe had a warning or maybe an informal warning. Is it too late for a confident conversation? No, it isn't. Great example for a walk and talk conversation, because these are particularly tricky issues. Maybe talking about the impact that the person's poor timekeeping is having on the team, or the impact it's having on the manager's ability to get things done. What are the manager's needs? What need has been compromised in the manager when somebody turns up late? Okay, you can wave the rule book at them and say, look, you're supposed to be here at 8:45, but actually in the context of what we're talking about today, it might be more appropriate to think about, listen to that employee. There might be something going on that you don't know about. Empathise with them. Ask them more questions. Acknowledge if they have a predicament that's leading them to be late, and then do some problem solving. In the problem solving, you're putting your needs as manager into the mix, and you're trying to get a dialogue going with that party so that actually you can find a way that the two of you can get your needs met. Great example, George, and it's something that comes up quite often, is around timekeeping. But the short answer would be no, it's not too late for a conversation, and do it as quickly as you can. Okay, I don't want to keep you any longer than I said I would. We've already gone over by just a minute or two. So what I would say is thanks for that today. Your attendance and your contributions as well. That's great. A couple of other webinars around the corner. You can find out all about our webinars at this address. There's a link just appeared in the chat box as well that you can click on. You'll find out more about our webinars there, and you can register as well. We've got one coming up in May around tenancy mediation, but we're doing that in the form of an online showcase. So our showcase events, very, very popular events, where we actually show you what a mediation looks like. So we'll be demonstrating in a dramatic fashion what a mediation looks like, and it's in particular around landlords and tenants. Again, some post-pandemic, what should we say, exacerbation of landlord-tenant issues. There's some stuff in the news this week about evictions and Section 21 notices and landlords using Section 21s quite wrongly, actually. So what do we do to mediate those kind of disputes? We will show you rather than tell you. In June, we're looking at crossing continents. Little development with UK mediation post-Brexit is that we've started a branch in Ireland. So we have an EU base for our activities. More about that later, but it's put in mind this idea about looking for disputes across countries and continents. Don't get me started on Ukraine, but the word mediation is being thrown around in relation to some of the issues with Ukraine and Russia and other interested parties. Some stuff there that maybe would form another webinar all on its own, but in June anyway we're going to be talking about applying mediation across countries and continents. Okay, there we go for today's webinar. We do like you to keep in touch. If you want to find out about any of our training courses, events, webinars, loads of free stuff that we give away, some stuff we have to charge for. But do keep in touch. You can like and subscribe with our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter, check out our LinkedIn, or take a look at our Facebook as well. You can like and subscribe our Facebook contributions. A few thank yous coming in the chat box. I'll stop now because I'm sure it's time for lunch on this lovely sunny afternoon. Hope you have a good bank holiday weekend. Have a great break. And thanks for your contributions today. And I'll see you on the next webinar. Bye for now.